Well, creeping up towards the Dark Ages now, we go past 400 AD, part 3 of this. And we go to 475 AD, whenever the Rome just literally starts falling apart, and we see how we kept this religion going after that point because of so many people they had already affected with it were also zealots on their behalf in the same situation, and so it continued on. It's the reason we have the Vatican City in itself today on that Saturnus Mons, and the hills in Rome, which were actually described as the 7 heads of the dragon in Revelations, but that's for another video.
By 476 AD, the Roman Empire had fallen, but Orthodox Christianity flourished. Constantine's insistence on a literal Jesus was the law.
Some suspect that it was done deliberately as a kind of trick. Others believe it just happened because it was easier.
Easier to trick people after they were already brainwashed into the idea? Just takes a couple of generations of people not continuing to say the same things in history, and somebody has a way to wedge in somehow, and lo and behold, they can even change history or the way that we look at it. It's amazing whenever you look back in a history book at just things like in JFK's time, you know, and early presidents of the United States or wherever you live in the world, and they're really limited in scope, but just like you know of is the time that you live in now and all this going on, it's going to be a little paragraph footnote eventually of just about nothing, and you'll be like, oh wait, there was a whole lot worse than what we're leading to believe. Well, is that people covering it up because they don't want to know that we were sitting here flip-flopping like acting stupid at one time? Is that what all this is about?
That the ordinary people were able to accept a literal view of stories that were very familiar.
Stories that were very familiar because for thousands of years they already had as very similar, if not the same story. They talk about it in Horus, and he supposedly has 180 connections of things that were said about Horus that allude to almost the word for word what was said about Jesus or in the Old Testament. We know that the Egyptians had a lot to do with it. In fact, they write off their fact of the way they started out was people that left Egypt. So it's conflated into that. I've talked about the different people who are encompassed in this whole idea too around the whole Middle East. In fact, that's what I studied, was everything except for the Bible, and all of a sudden, oh wow, doesn't that sound familiar? Doesn't that sound familiar? They had a flood too? Surely it wasn't like that. It was? Yeah, but he didn't release birds and doves and ravens, mud on their feet, and then yeah, but then what did he do? Oh, he built an altar thing. Okay, so then what happened? Oh, he was deified and written in the stars forever, and there's a boat there and everything too. Oh, that's not what happens to Noah. He gets drunk and his kids freak out and everything, and then they cover him up, and then there's this whole story, and then he curses not the guy that even did it, but his 4th kid and everything. Oh yeah, well that's Cain, and that's because they're trying to write them off. So Cain, see, story in the very first thing, Cain and Abel, Cain bad, Canaan. Oh. Let's continue. Now, St. Peter's Square that's right there, if you look out the other part of it over here, they actually have an ancient sundial, and that symbol that we looked at before that was supposed to be a sun symbol, and then the cross of it being the 4 cardinal points of it, which are what the Lamassu and cherubim of your Bible are actually made of, is the 4 cardinal points of the zodiac that are currently in use. So it all has to do with sun worship and everything, and people are like, duh. The center of which is an ancient monolith from Egypt also.
But even as late as the 5th century, Christians had to be told by the Pope to stop the practice of worshipping the sun on the front step of St. Peter's in Rome.
What? Yep, they actually had to make a speech about it and everything, just like St. Peter going here and doing that, or all these things you hear about in the Bible, where later he went to the Corinthians and he talked to the Galatians, which are the Gala people, which are the Gauls. Yeah. And Galilee, that has to do with it too. So those people were around, not like they weren't in any way, shape, or form, but lo and behold, they had to tell them, you know, hey, we're doing this Christ thing and we're trying to ditch that, even though you know it's got everything to do with it. We've got to ditch that sun worship thing idea of every year. But they're talking to a people whose livelihood runs off of farmers who have built the almanacs that we have today that run off of astrotheology of the old days. When you plant things, when you do things, and you can find mentions of these in the Bible and other mystic texts that are about this, that try to describe when you do things. The Druids were steeped in it. We lost a lot of their knowledge too. Wasn't it burnt away? So it didn't show Isis and the green man and a man nailed to a tree before a cross. But then again, there's twice in the Bible it says Jesus was nailed to a tree. One time it says in Egypt, which is called Sodom. And you read that statement and you're like, what?
Christliness was not something that just dawned in the year 1 of the coming era.
What he said right there was Christianity wasn't here year 1. In fact, the whole thing didn't flip over until the year 73 AD. You see, Jesus, you know, in that 33rd degree Mason type idea that goes on, when he was 33, he went through his persecution, but he told the guys on the Mount of Olives that a generation shall not pass before these things will happen in the second coming. People are still waiting for the second coming. The oddity of the whole thing is he just told you that the disciples are going to still be alive then. I don't know if you think they're vampires or whatever you might think of, but he's trying to tell you that they're all going to be, there are people, verily I say to you, there will be people here today listening to me talk right now. They're going to be here whenever this thing happens, because a generation is 40 years in your Bible. And 40 years after 33 is 73 AD. But there were 7 years of trials and tribulations, so you take 7 years off that and you end up at 66 AD. And in 66 AD, in the 6th month, on the 6th day, on the 6th hour, that's whenever the Jewish revolt happened then and started off the whole conflagration that led through to the end at 73, being Titus, which ended at Harmageddo. And if you look up Harmageddo, it'll go, oh, you mean Armageddon. That's just a Greek word for it. And yeah, that already happened long time ago. Now, if we have an Armageddon that happens, it's going to be like the damn movie that we know of as Armageddon. And Aerosmith's going to be singing the songs as a asteroid hits the Earth, and it doesn't take one that big. A little bigger than a stadium will wipe out, pretty much a country to a continent, way more than a city, and cause problems for the whole world. A little bit bigger than that, and it'll take us all back to the Ice Age, or worse, any bigger than that, and it may wipe us all completely off the planet, just like it did when it turned the dinosaurs into eventually what became chickens. And we're not doing anything about it in an age where we have the ability. It's sad to watch Apophis and these asteroids that are flying right by us and in between us and the moon and so on. And half of them we haven't seen till after they get past us, and we go, there's another one of those snowballs and hell. It's about to hit us and cause a problem on it. And it die. Giant airburst and so on. And the younger Dryas would set us to the point where we are now and had to come back from. And so many times there's been events like that, like great volcanic eruptions and so on, that only now we're able to correlate 1, 2, and A, B, C and put it together and come up with the right answer and figure out, hey, this volcano on the other side of the world screwed everybody. Just like the earliest dynasties of Egypt got screwed over right after building all the pyramids by a volcano that happened there in Africa. It caused the great droughts and so on. Although everybody wants to blame it on a god and things like that, don't they?
Beneath the epicenter of Christianity, the Vatican, under St. Peter's Basilica, is a ceiling mosaic dating back to the 3rd or 4th century that some believe clearly demonstrates the merging of pagan and Christian beliefs.
Well, also below that is an ancient Mithraeum. In fact, where they built the churches on top of. In fact, the bald-headed guy with the glasses that we were seeing in the first episode or so, and saw a little of him in 2, he's got a whole thing about showing you that a lot of the churches that were built across the ancient world were on top of other churches, many of which are Mithraeums. And they even have them down below still to this day. When they go in, it's the catacombs, but you'll see symbolism that's there. In fact, below the Vatican, whenever you go below it and start walking through its catacombs, on the wall are all these symbols to Saturn and all of the other Greek gods and catacombs and wall murals and things about it. Still to this day. Let's take a look at this depiction.
There's a picture of Christ sitting in a chariot, sun god, with wings and everything. Right under.
Yep, he's a sun god with wings and everything. Well, no. See, that's an angel, and Jesus got his wings. No, winged people come from all the different groups that you consider to be pagan now. By the way, that little plant over on your right conspicuously looks like a pot leaf. Other people say it looks like a three-leaf clover or an elm tree, and so an idea of a tree of life or whatever, or a maple leaf too, by the way. But here he is riding a chariot in a sun god guise, everything. Well, no, see, that's Sol Invictus. That's the Mithraeum thing, and that's Sol Invictus. And when you see Mythras and he's stabbing Taurus right there on his shoulder, that's the end of Taurus and the age that goes on there. But there's so much inside of that picture with the dog, the snake, and so on. But I've also shown that that's where the torrid meteor shower comes from and emanates from, just like the blood coming out emanates from there. And that has a large part to do with our Day of the Dead ceremonies and all around the world that equal to our Halloween that we have now today, which is of course followed by All Saints Day, showing you that they grabbed right in on that too. Oh, this picture's slightly out of the frame, isn't it, here? But he's a sun god, sun rays coming out of him, which looks like the Statue of Liberty and the halo that goes around him. That's the sun. It's the way you draw it when you're a kid.
St. Peter's Basilica itself. In fact, in the catacombs of Rome, there are many wrapped figures of mummies which they can't tell are supposed to be baby Jesus or baby Horus. And in many cases, they have a sun disk right on them.
Why would they have the sun disk on them if they were Mary's representations? So are a lot of them of Horus, and they've just renamed him or whatever, or just turned to say, well, this is just another one of the Jesus things. Good thing you can't quite date stone, huh?
But the idea that Christianity took its stories from ancient Egyptian mythology is too far-fetched for most Christian Orthodox scholars.
There are people that make their living off apologetics, where they know now that you've heard the things that you're supposed to never know about. And so they've already preemptively got something to say that tries to apologize, like Apollo, supposed to apologize for that situation and give you something to believe in on how it still might be true. Like, oh yeah, so everything is all from other people and it's all pagan, but this time it happened to somebody, it's not pagan and it really happened. You follow me? As opposed to what they've shown you here is the spiritual origin of it, and the Nag Hammadi text and everything do, and they say, oh, those are Gnostics. They always say that those were freakouts. They lived out in the desert and did these weird things. Yeah, they're going to say all kinds of weird things about them, aren't they? How about monks who are trying to keep the faith and get away from the people in the persecution? Knock, knock.
The fact of the existence of Jesus is one of the surest historical facts of anything in antiquity.
So here you have an apologetic making a comment like that. Whenever, if you look into it on anybody that is not swept up in it, they'll tell you that no, there's very little. In fact, there's so much in on all the other people that were around during that time, and there's nothing that you can really date to that time. It comes out to be no.
The notion of a biblical Jesus stemming from paganism is absurd according to leading Christian theologians. They claim Harper is misreading Egyptian mythology and ignoring the evidence.
Of course, that's what they say. They've got to say, well, just like he said before, oh, it seems like the same thing, and the people thought of it the same way, but ours really happened. So on to their end statements here.
Tom Harper is convinced of a link between the Egyptian pagan god Horus and Jesus Christ. His is not a literal view of Jesus, but a metaphorical one.
A lot of people have come to this conclusion. I've come to this conclusion a long time ago too. But I also say that it's not just Jesus, for it has elements of Bacchus and water to wine and all the things there. In fact, they're trying to put it all together as one, as I've said before. And the reality of it is it's much bigger. Now, you can apologetically think of it in a way that, well, that was that God that they were talking about, but they weren't quite sure on it. And everybody talked about it differently, but almost the same. But it was really Jesus, and then there it is. But before Jesus, there it is.
I think he's made a mistake of buying into views that really no historians that I'm aware of would accept as really credible.
Well, you're listening to one, and you've seen 5 or 6 also say it. I could show you about 40 videos real easily of theologians, professors, places that will actually show you and make a bunch of connections and show you that he's just trying to be apologetic at that moment also, sad to say.